I never even noticed that. Yeah. Good evening, welcome. I'm Lori Hester, Superintendent of Schools. We're really glad so many of you came out. This is a lot of fun for us because we're really getting to think forward and talk about the possibilities of what a new middle school could look like. So our agenda for tonight, is to give you some updates on timeline and process. I'm going to spend a few minutes with Justin talking about the educational visioning work and the teaching model that would sit with that, and that's the important work that happens before you design the space that will facilitate that work, that teaching model. Then our design team's going to give you some updates on the work they've been doing in getting to know both the land and the building at Sanborn. So they've been doing a lot of site work out there so they can best understand some of the options for where a new building would go. So high level view. Everything today I'm going to say in a minute, all of this is very high level view because that's where we are. And you're here to give us feedback before we get to the next one. We're going to give you some pretty fun, exciting options to what the building could maybe possibly look like. So Saul's going to show you 5 things they've started to actually sketch as a new school. All of it options that may or may not be the option, and other things might come that are much better, but it's the early stage of trying to put pen to paper. So it feels really real once you see some of that. The list of decisions to be made is very big, but we're going to give you some of the highlights of the biggest ones that are still sitting there that we haven't really referenced throughout the presentation, and that I think leads nicely into the main point of tonight is questions and feedback. The building committee really wants this to be an interactive, inclusive process so that we're building a school reflective of what the community's needs and hopes are. So that's hopefully some of what you came here to do, is to talk with us so we could take that back to the committee. All right? So really the purpose tonight, like I said, I'm going to talk a little bit on process and what we've done and where we are, and then the timeline going forward, again in big broad strokes. Updates as to the educational plan, review of the Sanborn site, possible options for the concept design. So I guess I just want to continue to say very clearly, none of this is anything you should leave here saying, oh, this is going to happen in the new school. That's not where we are. We're before that. What we heard at the last session we held January was a desire to have something to react to. So that's what we're giving you, but that doesn't mean anything here is actually what's going to happen. That's how early we are in the So where we are, this portion of the process called feasibility and schematic design. So that began last fall and will continue on through this summer. And that is the work where we're actually doing broad level work so we can inform the design team to be able to start to put together a design, big picture design of a school. So we're not going to be designing classrooms and things like that. We're going to be designing a footprint of a building, understanding the square footage. Ultimately, all of that together brings us to the cost, as well as all the site work to best know what's going on here on the, I keep saying here, but we're not at Sanborn, so assume we're at Sanborn when I say here. At the middle school site with what's going on those fields, what's going on with the woodlands and the wetlands, and really understand all of the impact. We're very fortunate to have such a beautiful space to work with, and we want to maximize that. So both logistically knowing what's out there, but also so that it can better inform the design of the building. We've been talking a lot about the timing of the vote for cost and securing funds through a request to the town. We're looking at a potential special town meeting in the fall. We were the select board on Monday night weighing options with them. It's a little more complicated with the presidential election in the mix because it's not just a local ballot to look at necessarily. There's other dates that are already set. So we were there Monday night. I think they're leaning towards putting the ballot for the middle school on the presidential ballot. So that would be a November 3rd vote. which would be preceded by a special town meeting sometime in September, October, and we're still working on all these dates. We'll be going back to talk with them on how that timing will work, but that's kind of where it's leaning as of tonight. And then design goes on for a year after that. That's where you're into the nitty-gritty floor plans and where does the sink go and the really specific outline of every space in the building. And then the tentative construction plan would be fall of 21 in order to finish in spring 23 and open in the fall of 23. So about a year ago, we decided to start, we didn't know if all this was going to come together or not, but the school committee and I worked on trying to get a little ahead of the educational visioning process because we knew no matter when it happened, that would be a key component that needed to be done. And it seemed helpful, and it's proven to be true that we would do that earlier than later. So a small but mixed group of us, teachers, Justin and I, parents, a consultant, really spent some time looking at what would we want education to look like in a school for the next 50 years, and how would that then inform what the floor plan and layout of the building would look like. So we did a lot of data gathering. We had a lot of data already, which was great, but we did have public forum. We used a lot of survey data that we had collected from kids and parents and staff. We visited some other middle schools at the time to just whet our appetite, which of course at the time when you don't have any building project moving and you come back and you're like, oh, that was fun, but we don't have a plan yet. So it just inspired us. Synthesized those findings and put together some themes. And out of that came 8 really core principles and elements that we've been really living by in terms of this design. And I guess the benefit and positives that I saw, it completely aligns with all the other work we're doing in the district across all the strategic planning and the district-wide goals we have. It's just a little finer tuned and a little more directive and certainly very middle school oriented. And so that helped us to identify some of these components. So this is the visual I love that came out of it. This is not something I would have ever been able to create, so I love that one of us who had this skill. In a minute we're going to talk a little bit on each of these 8. And you can see through the center really those core pieces that we thought were just crucial of joy, sustainability, security, lasting, rigor. All those things need to be strong elements while we really focus on how are we going to do the other things. Collaborate, be flexible, authentic, inclusive, engaging, balanced, provide choice, and of course, one of our biggest priorities, maintaining student wellness. So that led to, okay, what does all that look like in a school and really specifically related to a school design? So I'm not going to read this to you because that's really not where we're at tonight, just dive into each of these, but I wanted you to see how we started to break that out, related in how it connected to the physical setting, which is not something we do a lot of. We do a lot of how does it relate to what a teacher's doing or what kids are going to do or groupings or things like that. This really did focus in on physical ways we structure things for kids. So I'll give you a minute to scan that. So hopefully you can see some of the themes that presented there. And in a minute, I'm going to show you some slides of a school we visited, and you'll be able to see. This will be on the webpage tomorrow, so hopefully that. You know, it's so much more relaxing not to have to take photos, that's all. You're welcome to.
Called out, man.
No, there were like 5 of you, so there wasn't anyone. So what that's led to for us in the next phase of this educational visioning work is what do we want the construct and groupings of the kids to look like. So Justin's going to come talk with you some on what this discussion has been for us and the decisions we're making towards the goals we're hoping for. Oh, yeah, you finish this and I'll do introductions before we switch.
So welcome everybody. My name is Justin Cameron. I'm the principal of the middle school, and I'm so proud to share with you an educational vision that's part of an educational program that we're trying our best in delivering to the students ages 11 to 13 right now, presently in Concord. A lot of you are now sitting in our 6th grade building. And if you've been paying attention, we just did a reconfiguration of the two buildings. Even a year ago at this time, and for the last 40 years, this was a 6th through 8 building. Sanborn was a 6th through 8 building. And it was really limiting our programming and really limiting the opportunity to team, which I'll talk about in just a minute or so. But we just shifted. Our 6th graders are now here. We have some very rich data that I was sharing with Lori just a couple days ago about our behavioral referrals, our discipline, our referrals to the student support team. They're all down very significantly in a model that we have only alive here in the Peabody building for our 6th graders, which is a teaming model. We have 3 teams of 6th graders here at the Peabody building, and we have about 2.5 teams of 8th graders and about 2.5 teams of 7th graders over at the Sanborn building. Here at the Peabody building, our teams are primarily based and clustered together. So when a 6th grader is leaving their social studies class and a bell rings, they're walking about 10 feet to go to their math class. And when that bell rings, they're walking about 12 feet to go to their science class. That doesn't exist over at Sanborn. Sanborn was built as a junior high school model. So if you look to the right of this slide here, a junior high school model operates like a high school. Class assignments are based on schedules. Grade levels are mixed at all times. You have 6th graders walking past 8th graders. You have 7th graders. They're not necessarily taking classes together, but as you see at the last bullet point, buildings, junior high school is organized by departments, which is how Sanborn, for the most part, is organized. You walk down a wing and you have all your science classes. So right now, a 7th grader, a 12-year-old at Sanborn, a bell rings for their science class, and if you know the design of the Sanborn building, the science class is all the way over here, and this is actually happening. They have a math class out in their mods. And we're a community that has been spilling over and has been eligible for an MSBA project for over 15 years because of the spill out that's been going on in our classroom mods. For those community members who don't know the classroom mods, if you drive past Sanborn, they look like trailers. One of the things that not a lot of our community knows is there's no bathrooms out there. There's no water fountains out there. You know, the special education teachers in our model of special education, we push in and support students in the mainstream classes, but in times where students have to step out to say take a test or a quiz or to work on a project in a smaller room, they're going outside. The students who need to go to the bathroom are going outside. They need to go, hold that sentence for a second, right? They need to go in the building, in the Sanborn building, to access other rooms and to access the bathrooms. Took me a while. So the middle school approach, which is on your left.
We hope they're going.
I have some security cameras. Middle school approach and a junior high school approach could not be more different. It's slightly akin to, you know, when I have parents or community members say, you know, you're vice principal. A vice principal is very different from an assistant principal. Middle school is very different from a junior high. The dichotomy is as wide as a candy. The junior high school is really built to prepare kids for high school. And it's really a holding place so that students are ready for the organization and the design of a program for a high school. What we are doing, or what we're trying to do in our educational vision, is really extend childhood and bring it into the middle school years. Those years between 11 and 14 developmentally, and the brain research shares, are just as crucial as the age of 0 to 3. And I want you just to sit on that for a second, because from a brain standpoint, from a science standpoint, these years are so critical. And they're years that so often are quickly dismissed as, it's a shortest stint in the 12 years. It can be messy, we know that, but it's just so important. In fact, in one of the conferences I went to when they were talking about the importance of middle school, they actually asked the entire audience to think about what you consider your hometown. And then everybody thought, and then the question was, what town did you live in when you were the age of 13? And a lot of people actually have that in terms of their childhood and the town that they associated with as growing up. It's a very significant age. The middle school team approach gives students a small feel in what can be a big building. It gives the classroom teachers, the core teachers, which is the math teacher, the science teacher, the English teacher, the social studies teacher, a chance to collaborate and have what are called common prep periods, 1 or 2 periods a day, where they can come together as the core academic teachers, sit down and focus on the 80 or 90 students that they all share in common in that team, sometimes called a pod, sometimes called a house. And if those teachers, if the fidelity of your team has it that those teachers are able to just focus on those students and the social emotional growth and the educational growth and the fact that weekly they're talking about the homework that they're given, they're talking weekly about how many test quizzes or long-term projects are assigned, on a given Thursday or a Friday. If you have that in place, then you have a school that's able to focus on the betterment of your child at such a crucial age. And quite frankly, a junior high school doesn't offer that. I know junior high schools, I even know high schools who think they know the teaming approach, come down for a site visit at a middle school and just get a sense of, okay, so what this is you just bring together grade-like teachers, you put them in a conference room and you allow them to talk and share stories about successes and ways you're supporting your students. The problem with that, when you bring together all the grade level teachers, is, I've been there, and you have teachers correcting papers, you have teachers on computers, you have teachers who aren't necessarily paying attention until maybe your child is brought up, in a grade of 322 students. And statistically, that's hard to do with a group of that size, of course. We are able to promote student-to-student relationships within a team. Students sometimes go off-team for their specials, like their PE, their art, maybe their enrichment, maybe their, not so much the intervention. We really try to keep things like intervention and even directed studies, which is an intervention, on team. The student-to-teacher relationships. Being a former 7th grade team leader for 10 years, I really got to know the students on my team intimately. And I do remember the couple years that my principal had our off for another team of 7th graders coming to me for a study. And even when I went into lunch duty, it was a time that I got to know the other 7th graders on the other teams. But it's just amazing what the opportunity that's given to teachers when they just share the same group of students. And the research is so clear. If a student of a middle school age, if they have a positive relationship with their teacher or the adult in front of them, then they will take educational risks and they will thrive. If they don't share in that relationship with the adult that's leading the learning in front of them, then they're going to flatline. And that's of all genders and always of this age. It's only around 10th or 11th grade do students persevere through that and can actually reconcile not having a good relationship with the adult in front of them. What do you think, Lori?
I think the only last thing you're talking is the interdisciplinary opportunity. Because teachers are on teams, they can do things across content areas, and they're just not siloed the way they can be if it's a junior high and certainly in the high school. And I guess the last thing I'll say, we believe in this enough, we're actually moving it up into the 9th grade and have just reworked our plans for the freshman year of high school to be more like this team approach. So it's important that we give you all of this because when we are building our plans here for space, in a minute I'm going to show you what Situate built based on this model. That's going to be part of the ask, is to build a space that supports this. Thank you.
Great.
Good.
Okay.
So this is Situate, Gates Middle School in Situate. We loved it so much we've been there not just once but twice. They're a building that really built themselves on this team model and a real strong thread of project-based learning. So both the teaming model and the hands-on interactive inquiry, authentic learning types of approaches. We really heard at the last forum that we should be bringing some photos to help people sort of envision what this could look like. So you're gonna have to sort of go with me. I wish there'd been a way to capture like this 360-degree panoramic view of it because it would give you the feel. So I'm gonna have to talk you through where you're oriented so you can feel how that all comes together. So this is a classroom, and I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on these. I'm just giving you the visuals. We could spend 15 minutes on each slide and tell you why they did what they did. But certainly you can see it's bright, it's lit, flexible furniture, kids are in groups, things like that. And then this is another side of a classroom. There's a flexible wall there that collapses, so they have the choice. And they've clustered their teachers so the integration can happen. So this is history and English. If they want to do some cross work together and thematically teach something, they've got a wall where they can just quickly co-teach and put all the kids together. And then once you get, so there's classrooms all around, and we'll use the word pod just so we get the visual, all around this space, that in the center of the space is a lot of open, available learning areas for kids. And having opened a school with this space, and in construction we kind of stood there and said, you know, it's great we built it, but will they use it? They absolutely use it, because when you change the way you're teaching, and a lot of our teachers are dabbling and using or really full-fledged in all of this, and the space is constricting them. So once they see the space is available, it absolutely fills up and gets used. So this is part of that center area with classrooms all around it, and kids have presentation opportunities, there's meeting space for them. As we get into you can see there's some breakout spaces here, so some smaller sections are pulled off. This is also likely where they might do some small group work, whether it be regular education interventions or perhaps a small special education group might meet together. Very fluid, very flexible. Our design team likes to call them pullover spaces, not pull out, like in special ed we use a lot when kids leave the classroom, but pull over where there's a smaller group. What I love about this is it's so fluid as to who might be in there. It might just be a small group of kids working on a project and they just wanted to spread out. You have no idea why they're in the room together. And I think that just really builds that inclusive feel and flow. Obviously the sight lines are really good, so kids aren't left unsupervised while they're moving around, and that obviously is awesome. And then I had to put this in. This is Sandhorn. One of the science teachers did a fantastic energy project. So we're doing some of this, and then she so had to shoehorn the project into the classroom so the kids could wander and learn from each other, and all I could do while I was there was envision her being able to spill out and open a wall, what that really could have been, and maybe include all the other kids in the grade or on the team, and it's just not conducive to that right now. So this list I'm going to ask you to hold, because I want you to see some of the things we know you might be here to talk to us about. We're going to give you airtime on that, but before we do that, we want to give the design team a little opportunity to show you some of what they've been working on. So while I pull up your slides, do you mind just introducing yourselves? Super.
I'm Julie Leduc. I'm with Hill International, with the owner's project manager on this project.
I'm Andy Bowe, I'm with Hill International as well.
Mike Dowhan with SMMA. I'm the landscape architect. I'll be handling the site design for the project.
So Javali with you and Co, architect, and we're working on the design.
Martine Dion with SMMA. I'm the director of sustainable design.
Matt Rice, I'm with SMMA, I'm an architect.
Phil Poinelli, educational planner and architect at SMMA.
Great, thank you. And there's members of the building committee here too. I don't know if you want to raise your hand or identify yourself. Yeah. So they're here to hear your feedback firsthand, so glad to have people here to listen. So I think Mike, you're up. The trick is you gotta aim over there even though the slide's over there. It's like a little brain teaser. Yeah. Do you want me to click for you?
No, that's
Okay.
fine, that's fine.
So you gotta get to the
I'm just gonna
laptop.
stand up here and sit down.
Yeah, that's the way to do it.
Great. So I'm just gonna take a few moments to talk about the existing site, then I'm gonna hand it over to Saul, who's gonna start talking about all the building options. We wanna walk through the site, everybody knows the site, but we wanna walk you through the site anyway, so that you can kind of get an understanding of how using the existing site and the existing features of the site to inform the design for the school. Total site's about 31.5 acres. Sure, everybody knows, there's existing building, there's parking, there's some fields, there's sort of a flat plateau area that we'll talk about in a second, and then the rest of it is vegetated. There we go. So the site sits at an interesting intersection between sort of the public realm and the natural realm. And we include this slide because all of these slides really inform the site design. So we've got a really public edge on one side, we've got a really natural edge on the other side. And that can really start to inform how we program a new building. The next few slides talk about sort of horizontal and vertical elements of the site that are also going to inform the design. Again, the whole site's about 31.5 acres, about 46% of the total site is what we'll call plateau area or flat area. That's an area that's populated by your building right now. The parking, most of the fields, most of the fields and the area just north of the building where the existing septic is. The sloped area is probably about 54% of the site. That area is more predominantly, vegetated, really undisturbed. But it leaves us, now when you consider that the new building is going to be constructed on this site while the existing building is still in use. So what that really leaves us is an area of about, 6.5 acres, about 20% of the site really sort of through here. That's sort of what we call the buildable plateau area. That's sort of, that's all sort of led us to the idea that this is probably where the building wants to sit, considering all the other elements of the site that are in play. Talked about the tree canopy a minute ago. The tree canopy basically mimics the sloped area of the site, the sort of undisturbed area of the site. We feel like there's a lot of opportunities to integrate the program, especially the classroom portion program of the site, into the existing canopy in really fun and interesting ways. Finally, the last two slides talk about solar orientation. So north is due up on the site, so of course south is down to the bottom. So we think there's a lot of really interesting opportunities to maximize solar orientation, especially for the classroom wings where the children are going to be spending most of their time. And then finally, there's a nice little site section through the area where we feel like the building really wants to sit. So here's Old Marlboro Road out here. There's the flat area where all the athletic fields are now. And then you've got this sloped area that leads down towards the wetlands beyond. That's all really nice and filled with tree canopy. This site section is important because you're going to start seeing some sections through the other options pretty soon. That's going to show what the building relationship to the tree canopy and the slope will be. So it's really interesting stuff. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Saul, and he's going to start introducing you guys to all the options.
So this is very high level. In fact, it's such high level, we're going to talk about 5 schemes in 5 minutes. A lot of it is fluid, and we're just kind of showing what we kind of talked about with the team previously, and we're working on them right now. So,
You have to point at the laptop over there.
Yes.
So the first scheme begins to essentially create 2 bars. One is a public bar, where some of the shared functions, the cafeteria, the media center, and other sort of a school-wide program would be. Also, some of the off-team classes would be there. So that's what you see sort of at the upper bar. In the lower bar, you would have all the teams. So each class would have 1 floor, and the teams are organized sort of along a long corridor with the sort of with in between them some other classes that it would share. So essentially, you can think of it as a classroom bar and a public bar. And what's really interesting about this is that the classroom bar sits on the plateau, right? So that's 1 level. In order to get to the 3-level classroom bar, you go through these bridges that sort of cross this public space which is vegetated, or it can be play area, it can be slope. But there's a level of sort of beauty and excitement about going through this bridge to your classroom. And the classroom bar is actually on three levels, right? So you can see here the stack of the 3 levels on the top right, and you can see sort of the rest of the program on the top. And in the plan here, you can see how each bar is organized around 3 teams with a sort of team collaboration area in the center. And the section begins to sort of show the excitement here, in the sense that this is a classroom bar, and then you can go across a bridge, you can go down 1 level and up 1 level. What's beautiful about this is that the classrooms will be actually at the tree canopies. And one of the sort of critical things that we're sort of believing as a group is that the notion that every space should have not just daylight, but a view out. Throughout the research, that's one of the best ways to keep children's concentration, focus, and we talk a lot about joy, but a fundamental point in the sort of making it a joyful place is daylight and views out. So that's one of the drivers in all the scheme. The second scheme, and it begins to do the same thing, but instead of having separation between the 2 things, we kind of brought them together, and it begins to be a main street scheme where there's a public space that sort of divides the shared program from the classroom. It has less daylight, and the central space does not have a lot of great views to the outdoors, but it has some other advantages. You can see here, this in the previous scheme was where we had this sort of ravine cut through the program. But you can see here that the orientation of the classrooms begin to create a different kind of a sort of community, and each team is, again, gathered around a common space. One of the things that we're doing here, and we sort of got sort of great feedback from the team, is that even though the building is sort of oriented correctly north-south, the classrooms are oriented east-west, and what we're trying to do right now is reorient them to the sort of a better sort of solar condition. The third scheme we actually call the treetops. Instead of just hugging the slope, the classroom bar goes into the slope. So this really, we're kind of calling it the sort of treetop scheme, because the classrooms are really at the treetops in some of the situations there. And what this scheme does, essentially, it gathers the public program and the shared program around a square, and then there's this little bridge that takes you to the classroom. And actually, when you come in through the entrance, you can see the landscape slide through the bridge. Got this one. So you can see here. So you can see here, that's the bridge. It's a 2-story element that begins to kind of bind the 2 pieces of the program together. And you can see here the idea that the way that the classrooms are organized, that they can be balconies and public spaces that can actually go into the treetops. The solar orientation here is fantastic for the classroom. And the idea of creating a small hub to sort of gather the other programs. But last time, I think Don mentioned the possibility of actually taking the bridge and turning that into a real sort of the hub of the sort of the program, and we're working on that right now. The other thing we sort of talked about is this corridor is a very long corridor, and we're trying to kind of bring them a little bit closer so it creates a bigger, sort of a stronger community. We sort of like named this the pinwheel. So we wanted to try a program where at least, I would say 80% of the building is 1 story. It has its own advantages and it has disadvantages, but we wanted to try that out as an option. And the idea here was to create, to sort of create a sort of a central hub with the shared programs, with the classroom with the classes for each class sort of brought together, not in a long corridor, but in a sort of a agglomeration, and where each team, the teams are closer to each other. But so the configuration is interesting because of the slope. This group, the main area, and this group are on the plateau, while the third group is actually on a lower level. So what was interesting about this is that actually when you're here, the sort of green spaces in between the buildings, your view goes over that other classroom, and the roof of this building is actually an inhabited public space, which is green roof. So you can actually have play areas or a program, and all around it will be the treetops. However, the program was putting a lot of pressure on the plateau, and we're struggling to get some of the other programs like field and all that into there. So currently we're working on actually putting this part of the building on top of this and allowing for more green space in this area. The fifth scheme, again, it's a bar scheme, but in this situation, the sort of the building shared spaces are perpendicular. And what this scheme did is essentially took each team, and each team is made out of, each class, and each class is made out of 3 teams. And instead of arraying them or clustering them, we split them. So each class has 2 classrooms on the upper level and 1 classroom on the lower level, and it kind of flips 3 times. And that's because this bar is only a 2-story bar. The feedback was that that would not be true to the sort of idea of class building. And even though we had an open stair between them around the hub of the sort of each team, that it would not work as well. So we're kind of drifting away from that scheme a little bit. You can see here that sort of the bar, and the idea is that the media center would be at the sort of there. So there's positives and negatives to each one. There are things that we're kind of exploring. There's issues of cost, building surface area, all of those things that are being vetted out. All the schemes kind of fit into the program square footage. So in that sense, they're all similar. But we are currently developing 4 of them actually.
Thanks, that's good. Super. So really, this is the part where we tell you what we don't have figured out. And the list is really long, but we know there's some items of definite interest, so we want to be sure we name those, and then we want to hear your feedback more as we go. So certainly among those are going to be, I guess I'll name what we're still struggling with: oversize. How big is this building going to be? What will the footprint be? Cost attaches to all of that. So that's an ongoing process still at this point, as we sort of put out the vision, and then they start to put it to paper, and we start to do the math. So that's an ongoing discussion across the educational needs of the school, and that's the stuff I feel really responsible for with Justin and the staff here, which all of them have met with the design team, making sure that we really name that and articulate that. We know sustainability is of high interest. There's a whole attachment to the Warren article to fund this part of the project with some of those goals. So we are very aware of that. Martine's here tonight. She can help answer questions you might have and name some of your priorities if you want to be sure we take them back with us. The gymnasium, we absolutely have heard the needs in the community for a full-size gymnasium. We are very desperate for that as a Concord community with very limited options in town. So we've heard that need, and it's being talked about and considered, and certainly will be something that continues to be talked on going forward. The auditorium need has also been named to us very clearly. The high school auditorium isn't as friendly to large community activities like town meeting as I think some people had hoped. We do, unless it's a small special town meeting. If it's a big regular town meeting or a largely attended special town meeting, we actually set up the gym. So there's definitely been feedback to us that good-sized auditorium would have some community usage purposes. Now, of course, Justin and I can drool over that and make all sorts of grand educational plans in there too. So that's an ongoing discussion as well. And there's many more, and I think what we want to really capture from all of you is anything you want to have us take away on these, or whatever I haven't mentioned that you want to be sure gets brought back to the design team or the building committee or all of us in the workings of all of this. So then we're here really to take your questions, hear your feedback. We're going to record that. It'll be formally shared with the building committee. It's great that design team's here to hear it firsthand, so you can interact with them. That was part of our goal. And I think we're just going to open the floor up unless, yeah, good. Brian.
Sure. The options, it's great to actually see some kind of rough drawing
Yeah,
of this. I very much like the ability to separate the teams and classrooms from that central area. Thinking, I mean, the first option seemed great where you could have like each floor would be a grade and then all those common areas out front. And then when the community uses the building in the evenings or other times, you can close off the classroom areas and the common areas can be what is accessed. So that fulfills a lot of the concepts I've been hearing that you've been working towards. So I think these first sketches are really a good direction so far.
Thank you.
Comment on that, Lori?
Please, Dawn.
Just architecturally,
And
Brian,
Dawn,
that's
can you
it?
introduce yourself?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Because I have a feeling you're going to comment a few more times.
I try to listen more than speak. But Dawn Borriello, I live on Bristow's Hill Road. I am an architect and design schools, and SMMA is one of my competitors. It's been fun to be on the other side of things.
And co-chair of the building.
And co-chair of the building committee. And so I've been designing public schools in Massachusetts for over 20 years. But that's very perceptive of you, Brian, and I appreciate that you're at a lot of our meetings and are paying attention. In this day and age, with security in schools, as you might imagine, a lot of the behind the scenes functions and layouts of sites and buildings are taking this on, where you're literally separating private, meaning classrooms, students, from public, and that's intentional. And from a security standpoint, not just community use versus non, and you can shut down part of the building, but from a day-to-day lockdown, getting out of the building, keeping people who shouldn't be near students away from students, it's intentional. And I'm glad you brought it up, because as Saul was speaking, I was like, oh, that's a fundamental thing that I'm aware of, but I'm not sure others are, so I'm glad you brought it up. And same as bus and car separation on site, that is like number one, right? You want safety of the students is like paramount in all of these things, so as you're planning, there are basics to it, and as you could tell, all of Saul's options address that, and so I appreciate that comment, Brian, because it's perceptive and it's intentional.
Yeah, we haven't talked much about security, so I'm glad you made those points.
To
Yeah,
that
Dean.
point, we saw some pictures of Situate, and there was a lot of glass,
Yeah.
which showed that a teacher in a classroom could see what might be going on in a common area. But that also concerned me from the perspective of lockdown drills. Here's all this glass that's very penetrable, so it just seemed like, okay, how do we balance all of that?
Yeah.
And that just seemed like a very insecure situation. The kids were basically in a fishbowl that they cannot really secure.
Oh my gosh, I can't help myself.
Okay.
Also very perceptive, but if you meet with any security professional that I work with, security consultants that are doing, they have researched every single school incident out there, and here's what they'll tell you. Transparency is part of creating good culture, which cultivates safety. And when you get to a point where there's someone that shouldn't be in the building, there's a plan to get students out of sight. And when I say out of sight, like especially in the elementary schools that I design, there's a view, so there's transparency to the corridor, but there's an intentional space in the room that is out of sight from the corridor. We used to put blinds, and I don't know what SMMA does, but we used to put blinds on all those. Well, the idea now is that if a blind's pulled, there's people behind it. And, I don't want to get too deep into security, but you can get through a drywall wall with certain things that harm people just as easily as glass. So if someone thinks that someone's behind it, they're going to do what they're going to do. The whole issue is slowing things down. and that creating good culture and transparency and students recognizing each other cultivates safety in the school in the sense that those incidents we hear about are really small compared to bullying, assault, harassment, all of things that are bigger security issues in schools.
So I think I'll
these
just
things
add, the one piece I'll add from our side is that we don't train kids and staff to go to a corner of a room and sit and hide the way we did 10, 15 years ago. We now train them to make choices. And the biggest choice is if you can get out, get out. So it feels different to me. I think years ago where we trained them to hide in a corner and just stay put no matter what, I would have been much more worried about what you're referencing. And we now train all of them to make empowered decisions about what's going to feel safest. So it's continually evolving. There's a lot of great work.
the design will evolve with all of these security issues.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely top priority.
So changing gears a little bit,
Please.
I have an 8th grader who she's spent a couple years at puberty and is now at Sanborn, so she's experienced both of these buildings. And so I sat down with her and asked her about the kinds of things
Great.
in each building that make her day nicer and things that are less nice.
Oh, super.
And so, she had a lot of really helpful input.
Yep.
And so, I think one of the things that would decrease student stress during the day, a lot is not having to run.
Yeah.
Because in reality, it's great to have
Yeah.
the bar with the classrooms and the bar and then the public areas. But then when you look at the student schedule, they've got a core class followed by band and then a core class and then art and then a core class. So they're going back and forth all day.
Get her
And
steps
so-
in all day long.
What's that?
Her steps are in all day long.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
But
even
it's
as we were
stressful.
talking, we were like, oh, it'd be awesome to have all the off-team stuff in the middle, and then have these wings coming off like an airport. Like airport, what do you call them? That. And so when I saw that the pinwheel option, I'm like, yes, because that's exactly what I think would make
Great. That's
that
great.
it would help that. And the other one that would be really helpful for the kids is, I'm sure you already know, when they arrive, they're not allowed to go back to their classrooms. They have to wait until a certain time because that's so the teachers are available in the classroom. So they have some time where they should, and they have designated areas where they have to wait. And if their lockers are not accessible to them in that space, then as soon as the bell rings, they now have what feels like 10 seconds to go to the locker, organize their day, and then run to their first period. Whereas they were waiting for they were waiting for
the
a
time
while.
doesn't get used.
If they couldn't use that time to have access to their lockers, then that would be really helpful. So
That's great.
if the places where the kids are going to wait in the morning is in the public-y kind of areas, and then if on the way to where their team rooms are, if the lockers are on the way to that, but they can get to it from the public area where they're waiting, then during the day when they're between classes, if it's kind of close to where the classroom, where their wing is, and they can get to a locker between classes. My daughter said that would help a lot.
That's good.
That would
We're
help.
we're definitely recruiting more feedback from the kids. Justin and I are working on that, and out of the mouths of babes, you sort of go, oh, that makes perfect sense. So thank you.
Sorry,
It's
it's a long one, but that was her.
No, it's
Those were her
great.
biggest ones.
Great.
So I thank you for presenting this and for having this forum. It's really helpful. I feel like I'm probably sounding like a broken record at this
You
point.
can say it. I'm
but
going
I
to
will.
respond after you.
I'm
so go
going to
ahead.
say it because it is
Glad to.
concerning that the floor plans are great. There was no mention of anything about inclusion or anyone who was consulted about inclusive design. And it's worrisome for the kids who we're bringing back in district, who were in maybe sensory friendly environments, and we're now saying, okay, come into this environment, but we don't have an expert. We don't have anyone with the lens of a disabled or someone with the lens of disability, an autistic person on the committee, anyone, and that's when I look at this, and I'm really concerned. I mean, concerned. So yeah, it would be helpful.
So we certainly have heard you. I don't know if anyone on the design team wants to weigh in. We have heard that loud and clear. I think we left one of the forums hearing a broad range of expertise you were hoping for, and I think we've been talking on what that would look like. Phil, do you want to weigh in, given this is your forte?
Yeah, and we have significant experience in dealing with full inclusion of all children, and a lot of that. At the moment, we're talking about placement of how the school gets organized and relationships and adjacencies and so on. But a lot of the things that you're talking about are work into the details of how spaces work with light, with color, with texture, and we do have the experience to bring that, working along with the professionals in the school department. So.
And I know we took very diligent notes at the forum we had with you folks, and we've been referencing all of those resources.
Yeah, so those weren't the resources though, because we're talking about first person resources, not of what the disorder is, right? Not the disability, but actually someone who has an expertise in design and disability, right? So that combined background is what we're asking for, not
Correct.
do we know, the disability. And so it's concerning, and I understand, I respect your background, I understand what's being said, but I also know that in the disability community, that first person perspective, we don't have that lens, right? No one has that lens, and the first person lens, when we say the students can tell us things, well, the disability community can tell us things, and the people who are working in the disability community and do design work, well, those are the experts. And there are consultants out there who actually can bring that expertise.
So we definitely have heard you, and I'm gonna kind of look at Dawn as co-chair of the building committee. I think the committee can talk more on what those options are. I know we've talked a lot about it and trying to be sure your needs are met, maybe not through that vehicle, and I guess that's the part we gotta keep talking about, how we get to a place everybody's comfortable.
Thank you.
Feel free to contact me and we can communicate. I know
Yeah, that's a
Lori
good
has
idea.
shared my expertise. I sit on the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board, which oversees the access code in the state. So I, every other Monday, sit on a board and hear variances and understand architecture as it relates to access. But then educationally, I design buildings for a living. So I also understand how delivering education for all students relates to the architecture. So I have some of that, but I think I know what you're looking for. So just reach out to me. I don't know if I have a card, but if not, my email is accessible. It's on the website. We'll work with you.
Thank
So
you.
you're welcome.
We definitely hear you. We're just trying to figure out how to, the
And
right
yeah.
vehicle. We
I think I know what you're leaning towards, and I think we can do it. And I know one of the resources you sent through, I was like, oh yeah, of course. So reach out. We'll continue this.
I'm gonna go in the back and make my way for it.
I'm Peggy Wortelin. I remember when my now college student was here at Peabody, and everybody was just laughing at how ridiculous it was that there had been some fad when the building was built, that it should have been, it's in California, why did they do it this way, and these partitions that slide back and forth, you can hear right through them and they don't do anything. So I noticed in the picture you had a situate where you had the wall, it looks like it's thicker and it looks like it
It's
actually
a lot thicker
floats.
and soundproof.
So that's good, they figured out a fix for that, but I guess, and the designs look great and everything sounds good, but how are you going to try to ensure that you're not falling into some kind of trap?
Anybody in the
that's
design team wanna grab that?
20
or you
years
want
from
me
now, people will go, how can
Yeah,
they have done that?
One of the things, if anyone in the room can tell me what education is going to look like 20 years from now, we want to meet because you're probably a magician. But what we're trying to do is design for flexibility, to be able to create spaces that through their adjacencies, through their configurations, have the ability to address different teaching and learning methodologies across time. Speaking to the first part of your question, the technology of and building science has changed significantly over the years in terms of acoustics and the ability to create very quiet spaces for learning, to be able to isolate noise generated from one space to another. the ability to create different types of lighting within a space and adjust both the color and temperature of the lighting. So there's an awful lot of those parts that the profession has just advanced so much in that will, between that and having spaces that can adapt to changing pedagogy over time, that's really our intent.
Yes, of course.
So some of these issues are also been studied over the last 12 years or so. So some of this what some people call pods or teams or has been
No,
sort of
it
studied
looks
12
lovely.
years
I'm
ago.
not arguing.
I'm sorry.
I'm
It's
not
a
trying
fair
to,
question.
I'm not arguing that might not work or might not be great. I just remember.
No, so there's a
Yeah.
context to it, and it's kind of interesting. It's been very successful. So the Department of Defense has tens and tens of schools around the world, and they sort of assembled a really pretty visionary board 12 years ago, 15 years ago, and some of these ideas have been tested. The idea of these partitions that are actually they're pretty silent nowadays. So none of this stuff that we're talking about is really kind of the experiment of the moment. We would never build a school that represents a moment in time, I think.
We've been over to Hanscom, which they built, and it's one we could put in the slides, but you'd be here all night just looking at another building. And we went from one wing of a certain grade where all of the rooms were closed off, all the glass was closed, and we were literally testing. We had one of us the kids were there, one of us on one side and one of us on the other. We couldn't hear a thing. And then we went to another grade level, and they had opened all of it up, and this whole entire pod was one enormous space, and it was this gorgeous flow and ebb of thing. But they weren't stuck in either place. They could go back and forth, and flexibility is the name of the game, because all of us know we don't want to do something 10, 20 years ago. Who did this? You'll all be using my name differently and all that. I want you to go, who built this amazing school? Think of it that way. Let me go here in the middle. Yeah.
So it looks beautiful and gorgeous, and I can't wait for my vet career to maybe step foot in it. One of the things that, so I'm Elizabeth Wintercorn, I'm a member of the Concord AMP, so we're in support of sort of music education, band, orchestra, chorus.
Yep.
And as a human being, I have been a singer, an oboist, a pianist, I've been musical theater, I do all the things, right? In addition to being a parent and a full-time job. So, for me, this idea of inclusion, having all walks of life being able to participate in these things together, over half of the student population at the current middle school participates in one of these ensembles.
Yes.
We need to make sure that those, and get the auditorium you can get. We know you're gonna work for that, that's fine. Please get a big one, and musical theater, gorgeous. But what I'm talking about is, this is a place where kids who are struggling maybe academically shine. This is where the kids build their long-term relationships. These are the relationships that they're gonna carry through high school, into college, into real life, and beyond. And you have currently a staff of 5 full-time music educators. That is more than the high school. The number of kids participating in music in the middle school is more than the high school. The level is better than the high school.
I'm not going to repeat that anymore.
I didn't say that. I don't know if you recorded
Sure.
And it must be a priority to give your band a band room and to give your jazz band a recording studio, maybe, I don't know, these are the things, and to give your chorus a chorus space where they're not in a line, but they can listen to each other in a circle, and they can listen to other things, and they can play music, and the teachers have their opportunities. Currently, the orchestra, is on a stage that's half taken up with band equipment, or they're kicked out because of musical theater, or because each of these places needs to be specific to their type of music. These teachers need to be supported. This is a major, for all the sporty kids, there are just as many music kids. And fundamentally, this needs to be a thing that is supported in this place.
I'm smiling because they've heard me say that about a bazillion times.
I'll tell it
Better
20,
coming from
30,
you,
40
probably.
times.
Yeah, thank you. Very well said. Did you have anything? I know you were waiting.
Elizabeth
She did it
said
for
all
you,
better
but-
than I can say,
Yeah,
so.
okay. So,
Yes.
I like the yes.
Yes, and that's what I'm here to say, and I have my daughter prepared something.
great.
If I can, to get like the student perspective. As a parent, I'm yesing, and my daughter says the following. I'll read it really quickly, and imagine I'm cute and young. Thanks. My name is Sophie Richardson. I am currently a freshman at CCHS, and I went to Peabody for middle school. I am a trombone player in the CC concert band, and I was in band at CMS and elementary school with Mr. Nosi and Mr. Halpani. I can't make it tonight since I have a rehearsal for CCHS Pit Orchestra for our spring musical, but as a very active member of our band at CC and an alum of CMS bands, I think mine is a useful perspective to share. Obviously, every detail of our wing at the high school would not be needed or make sense at a middle school, but what I can talk about is the CC Performing Arts wing and how I use it. I'll briefly describe my day at school and how the music wing plays a part in that, then compare it to my experience at Peabody. When I arrive in the morning before school starts, I go to the band room. I have a band locker where I can fit my trombone, and then I usually hang out in the band room until school starts. There are always other band kids in there, and we help out around the band room or just talk. This is a good time to ask questions of Mr. Bresco, who will be at his desk in the band room or his office right next door, or something of the band council, and submit permission slips or money and take care of those things. The black box acts as the same thing for the orchestra kids and the chorus room for the chorus kids. During lunch, I like to practice. There are sometimes lessons going on in one of the 6 practice rooms, but usually there are a few open during all of the lunch blocks. I'm skipping some of it because she gave a lot of detail.
We won't tell her.
What?
We won't tell her.
Some people practice in the band room at lunch, which is also an option on days when the jazz band or percussion ensemble isn't using it. The band room is also always open for band kids to study in, so when I have homework to do during lunch, I usually sit in there. We have a beautiful auditorium that is easily accessible from the band room, and we have storage in the wing for uniforms, stands, and chairs. There is also a recording studio, but I haven't spent much time there, so I can't speak to it. For me and a lot of band kids, this band room and the extended performing arts wing acts as a home base. The band is definitely more of a community than it was in the middle school, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we have a space just for us, where many of us spend a lot of time. Since I have such a great place to be grounded, my transition to high school has felt very smooth. I never had that feeling at Peabody. In the morning here at Peabody, a lot of kids are in the forum being hectic. And the space is not only for band kids. My trombone did not fit in my regular locker at school, and we had no band lockers for instruments, so we would put them on the floor in the forum, around the side hallways, not the carpeted part. The instruments would be in the way, they would always get moved around, it was generally a mess. I didn't love putting my expensive, and I can say, really expensive instruments.
I will not send my daughter with her actual violin to school because I would be too afraid something terrible would happen in the middle school to it.
But it's
Sorry.
still, I think janitors might move it, it's in a case, but it still doesn't feel secure, like I do now. The forum is also used for other things, like this event, indoor recess, school assemblies, so we couldn't leave the chairs and stands out and would always have to dedicate time to dismantling things and putting things up when we start. It never felt like our space, since it wasn't. I asked a few times if I could use the forum to practice during lunch, but it wasn't really set up for that. They could give us that space to use, so I never could. It would be a great thing for the middle school to have a middle school appropriate version of CC Performing Arts Wing, a solid home for the band and the band kids here at CMS.
Wow. Thanks, Sophie, for us. She really captures it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for letting me read it.
Mary?
Hi, my name is Mary Hartman. I'm the vice chair of the finance committee. I had the opportunity a few weeks ago to hear Dr. Hunter speak at the League of Women Voters, and you got me so excited about the educational opportunities. I felt good about the future, and I don't often feel good about the future sometimes. That was a wonderful thing. Also, I'm excited about the sustainability. We can take some inefficient buildings and do a lot of improvements. But my job as a member of the finance committee is to remind us that this is a big ask of the community. most of the people that live in Concord do not have school-age children. And in fact, right now, we're already spending quite a bit of our annual budget on debt service for schools we've already built. And I know that debt service is going down, but it's still a big number. It's about $7 million a year. So it's my job now to remind us that we might not be able to have everything that we want. I think we can do something that's wonderful, I really do, but there are gonna be some trade-offs that need to be made, so I have a little sobering message.
No, I think I'm gonna fully support you on that.
And
We
I know-
can't have
and I know
everything
you're
we
aware of
want.
this.
We won't be able to afford
Right.
it, so
And-
we all need to leave here knowing we're not all gonna get whatever we maybe hoped for.
That's all I wanted to say.
We want you to be
Thank
part of that discussion though, and not to go make that decision off in another space. And then we'll figure out how to love what we end up with anyway.
Thank you.
I actually, thank you, I appreciate that a lot. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Leslie Flynn, and my son Brady is in 7th grade in Sanford. And we just moved here in September. And I have had the unusual experience of when we were living on the South Shore, he performed a lot at Situate, which has a fantastic auditorium. We had the experience of going from town to town to look at the middle schools to try to figure out where he was going to fit. And we saw some amazing buildings in Beverly, Peabody, Situate, and he spent last year at Hingham, which has a brand new building. And we picked the town with the worst school.
Building.
Best school, worst building. And that was because of the community here. And I think whatever we build, it's the community that will make the school great. That said, all of those schools have world-class music facilities. They have these auditoriums where any orchestra can play. They have chorus rooms and music rooms, and they have outside access to those auditoriums so that other people can rent the space and do performances there. And those things are huge. And yet, we have a better music program. So I just want to, I'm not a plant, but I do want to add to what everybody else has already said, that I think that that is so critical to the composition of this community. It's one of the things that makes this education program in this town so very special. And I hope that it gets, I know there are lots of other competing things. I too hope we have a full gym. But I do hope that we place some emphasis on that, because it really is something quite remarkable, I think, here in Concord.
Thank you. Here.
So, my name is Tom Eisenberg. We have 3 kids in the high school, middle school, and in the elementary school. And so I just wanted to come back to your comments from earlier, because I think it's an incredibly important thing now that we're replaced elementary school, we're in high school, wonderful. Now we're talking about middle school, also wonderful. But it's also true that, as you say, many of the folks in the Concord community don't have kids in the school. And so what I wanted to ask is, how does it work into your thought process to make this so that, obviously it's a school, it serves the student, that's the primary function, that exists in the community. And the community has a variety of needs and interests. And so how does that work in the thinking and design process to render it valuable to everybody in Concord?
Anyone want to see one? Thanks, man. No, I know they have answers, that's why I'm doing it.
So I think what we really focus on is, again, that notion of flexibility, but in this case, flexibility to allow certain aspects of the program to really function for the community in other ways. So we look at some of these large items like the gymnasium or the auditorium spaces. They're spaces that can be actually rented out to the community, to other members who are coming in. So they have a life beyond just the school that offers up additional amenities for the community beyond. You can also think of something like a fitness space that could be also something that the community can come and utilize during after hours.
But does that wind up as part of the design process? That it's one thing to say, here's a thing that we're building anyway. How can you take 5%, and sort of make it available, versus what are we trying to do here, right? We're trying to do the following things, some of which are school-related things, and some of which are other things, and let's have that.
Yep.
And so those are fundamentally different.
Yeah, it's not one after the other, it's both simultaneous. I mean, I'm hearing even lots of needs for meeting space and things like that, so we're talking on it right from the beginning of the design process. So it won't be we build a school and then we go, oh, well, how could the community use it now? It's absolutely part of the process at this stage.
If there's other ideas, I mean, if you have
Yeah, make
thoughts
sure we
about
hear what
spaces,
those
that would be great for us to hear.
wish lists are.
Perfect time.
I can give an example of something I'm doing in a project I'm working on. We're providing a community room, and the hope is that it's a multi-generational thing, and in this case, it's an elementary school, but looking for seniors to use it as a senior center, families that come in that, may have a student in the elementary school, but also babies or toddlers that can use it as a space as they're there to meet with teachers. So it's an intentional space in that example, but it's part of the building, it's attached to the building, it's very much part of how they can use it. It's also got a kitchenette that they're gonna use with their student garden to be able for the teachers, in this case, elementary school, we don't want kids burning themselves, but to be able to cook and prep food that's grown on site. So in a lot of ways, schools are starting to function. It in every community, it's a huge ask to put millions and millions of dollars into a building. So that's one example of how a community is looking to engage and create space within the building that's intentional for the span of generations, right? There could be seniors reading to students, there could be students doing projects with seniors to really start to bridge that generational gap intentionally.
Yeah. I'm gonna go here. And then
Bougie Cookman. I'm really curious about, first of all, I love the integration of the light and the trees and the real thoughtfulness of the site, bring that into the classrooms, it's fabulous. I'm really interested in the sustainability piece, and when you were talking about the different designs, I didn't hear how the different designs one might be better or not for sustainability, and I'd love to know what are the decisions that still need to be made around it? Because it's there,
all of
it's
them,
decisions.
mostly. Yeah. So Martine can answer that, she's our expert.
Right, so sustainability is basically integrated in the process. So Saul did mention a couple of the, especially with daylight and views, that's one goes, there's a set of sustainable design measures that will be integrated with the project. We're looking to do an ultra low energy net zero ready building, so and that aligns with the town's climate goals, greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. But on top of that, we're looking at the whole variety of sustainability, a sustainable approach, and as you mentioned, wellness is also one of them. So abundant daylight, water efficiency, we're looking for a nice integration of the building with the site, and in that, making sure that we take advantage of that in informing and supporting the educational program. So we would have outdoor classrooms, for example, making sure that the sustainable design aspects of the project would be used to support environmental literacy as part of the program as well. Indoor environmental quality, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but that's
Martine, we happen to have a few of your slides, so
that would be great.
Yeah.
And then you can go, and this is going to be posted, so you can go and look at the details.
Yeah, they're at the end.
One of the points I just like to make is we've talked a lot to other towns that have done net zero buildings, and one of my concerns is just when you say solar ready, they often say then it never really happens.
So I can just certainly explain that. The Massachusetts code that just went in effect officially on February 7th as a requirement for PV readiness for a certain equivalent to a certain amount of your predicted energy use. SMMA design for the past 10 years, we've designed the majority of the roof that has best solar accessibility for PV. We've designed it to be ready. We've made sure that from the roof to the electrical room, there are connections and conduits ready to receive the equipment. So that will be part of the project. The PV system itself, installing a photovoltaic system as part of the project, that hasn't been decided.
So that's one of the to be decided.
That's one of the to be decided.
So
But
as-
the PV readiness will be there. The structure will be designed to receive a photovoltaic system.
So, in a way, I represent mothers out front here in Concord, and I would just really believe it's very, very important to make sure that from the get-go, it's operational that way. So, just adding that to the
We definitely
conversation.
hear that from the community, and it's just a matter of whether we do it initially or if we phase in the solar piece and have to work through the funding sources. And I'm looking at Brian because we talk about this a lot. And
Yes, I know.
he's been very creative in helping us envision how this all plays
It's-
out.
It's
so
very,
that we
it
can
would be so
do it all.
exciting to have this happen.
What I want to say though, that the PV is one thing, but in order to be able to afford or minimize the size of the PV, that's what, the reason why we're doing net zero ready, an all-electric heating and cooling system, is to be able to afford the smallest PV we could afford with that building. So that's to our design team, that's the first step, that's the first goal.
I'll let Brian just add on to that since we've talked
Yeah,
so much.
that's, I want to reiterate that, I'm also the chair of the Climate Action Advisory Board in town, that's why I'm kind of involved, but sustainability is, people think of solar panels or electric cars or things that are different. When you're doing a structure, thinking about passive house design and what's in the wall systems is more important because you can't bolt it on or go back and change it very easily. And SMMA and Martine has been really kind of focusing on those aspects. And the all-electric is also another one because it's the only fuel that gets cleaner over time. That's where I hope that the money on this project is spent first. I would love to see the solar array, and I'm really hoping that we can do that with the light plant and maybe find more cost efficiencies. But I don't want to talk to schedule because there's a lot of things moving. So focusing on things we can't go back and change easily, like the design of Passive House, I think that's where I'd like to see the effort placed.
Thanks. Thank you. Linda.
Hi, this is, I'm Linda Neiman. I have 2 young kids who will hopefully get to use this middle school. I'm very concerned about the sustainability as well and very much supportive of it. And I want to add to the issue about cost that was brought up. Some of the early numbers that you did, Martine, you could comment on it. Having a super efficient building, having it solar ready, will save us money in the long run. And the initial upfront outlay is less than 1% of the total cost. So it's a good return on investment. And you can go into more details on the numbers. I just wanted to put that out there. It's not something that's going to add a huge amount to the total cost.
So what you're referring to is the preliminary estimated incremental cost of the net zero ready portion that Brian was referring to, the building enclosure, all electric system, compared to this code that you have to design your building to. This new code and stretch code. Concord is a stretch code down. So we designed, the stretch code allows you to design a pretty efficient building. And the gap between that stretch code, very efficient building, and a net zero ready is quite narrow. And I think that we can certainly bring more detail of it, but the payback is definitely it will depend because we're going to do cost estimates and we're in the different bidding market right now. But we tested the less than 1%. We tested a 2% and 3% potential incremental cost, and they all came back to a less than 10-year payback, more in the 5 and 6 years. And we will do that again once we get the real cost estimate. So we are really looking to be mindful to the cost. I do agree that there has to be a balance, and we have to make sure that this school is for the kids and to educate the kids. So we're very mindful of that. We'll be paying a lot of attention to that incremental cost, but this building is going to be built for 50 years. So when we say a 5, 6, or 8-year payback, that's a really good return on investment. And that's something that we need to be considering.
You can hear at some point there's going to be a lot of numbers coming out.
Yes.
And we're going to have to ask people to really spend the time to do the work with us to hear how all this plays out. So, yeah.
Right.
Who else? Peggy, and then next.
I wanted to go back before to a possible community use. Has there been any consideration about maybe using it as an emergency shelter for the community? Because I've heard talk that we need one.
Yeah, we've talked about it, and I'm looking at Dawn because I've talked mostly with Dawn. There's a lot of expense involved, so we're still in the process of vetting those. I think that's why the high school isn't one, because it adds on so much. So we're still looking at it. We haven't made a formal decision. But
Yeah, it comes up on every
prioritizing.
single project I work on, and ultimately the cost increase with the structure required and the uplift and the how the glass needs to be treated, and because codes are so different now than they were even when this building was built, it becomes, especially an emergency shelter, a lot generators get huge. There's huge costs, and communities, every single community is interested because they all need them, and then they see the numbers and they all back off. So when it came up here, I kind of chuckled. I was like, I've been down this road. So I'm not saying it can't happen, but let's look at the numbers, I guess, is the answer.
I wanted to throw out one more thing. So we've had 2 buildings that were designed by these architects, the Alcott and Thoreau, and then we've rebuilt all the elementary schools and the high school. How are they looking? Are they going to hold up for their 50-year expected life? How's the maintenance going? Have we gotten our money's worth? Is there some way to quantify that to maybe help calm the
Yeah, I
taxpayers?
mean, I'll give you my educator's view of that question. Absolutely. I think we're very well served at Alcott and Thoreau. Very successful schools. The facilities allow us to do some of these things we're talking about. There's enough space. The way that things are configured, we're able to do some of what we're talking about. Elementary is designed differently, so more of it happens within the classroom than between classrooms. But we're being very well served. Maintenance has been very manageable there. We're doing some energy unit work replacements over the next couple of summers to get those up to, speak of sustainable, get those to where they could be 15 years later. The high school, we really don't do anything at the high school 5 years in, so I think you're going to be incredibly well served there. We are in preventative maintenance mode, and even that's minimal because things are still so new at this point, but that's our goal right now, is to be sure we're building that robust preventative maintenance plan. I have to think even these 2 buildings have served you very well for 50 years. It's just time. It's just time. So it's a great question, and I think one they know loud and clear that we want to replicate that and have that same sustainable model. Yeah, I'm gonna go there because I know you're right.
Diana Lee, I just want to comment on one of the drawings that had a green roof, which I totally took me by surprise, and I really love it. I think it could be used for community, for the students themselves, for like all kinds of environmental projects and learning. You could do a lot of capture rainwater, do all kinds of interesting stuff, and also sustainability. So like I would encourage you to go with that if that's something feasible.
It's pretty unique.
Yeah.
I know, we all went, oh. Shayna, and then I go ahead, Shayna.
Thanks, Shayna Brito. As the co-president of the CPAC, the Special Ed Parent Advisory Council, I am concerned about the inclusion of all students and students with disabilities. And I wondered if you could speak to, we've talked about, classroom design and surfaces and light, but to the larger perspective, I think, to the 5 high-level designs, if you could speak to sort of how those designs could be viewed through the lens of inclusion and the lens of students with disabilities. For example, access, mobility issues, sensory issues, looking at multi-level design, single corridors, and just sort of how the lens of
So, I can just say a couple, we don't have time to go over each one, but one of the key things we started doing is begin to kind of integrate the special education classes any programs that would require that into the general classroom fabric. I don't know if that begins to touch on the subject matter that you're saying.
The overall design, actually, so you shared sort of 5 high-level designs, and how do each of those designs, how are they optimized for inclusion, or what are the benefits of maybe those, you spoke about the light and, but feel free to jump in, but yeah.
Well, I think that
The organization of the classrooms that you had,
so
the
so
corridors.
so for instance, the possibility of creating a cluster of classrooms around a common space, and the common space itself would be accessible to daylight. That sort of applies to all of them. So there's a sense of community, but within that, the idea is that there's, in each one of the schemes begins to kind of create a variety of spaces where there's choice for students. For instance, there's Eddie spaces, so a kid that doesn't want to be with everyone else can go hide in it, not hide, but sit in it. There are places where you can actually sit in full daylight with full views, and places that are a little bit more sheltered. I think that we would have to talk about the specific sort of idea of inclusion, because I think the idea of inclusion, sometimes within the groups that you're trying to kind of talk about, begins to be sort of contradictory. So I think that, for instance,
I think there
the
might
idea
be
of
a more-
accessibility in all of them, that we are making sure that every area becomes really easily accessible, and even though you have different levels, for accessibility purposes, I kind of prefer the sort of what I would call a pancake house, pancake school, but where everything is on one level. And I'd have to say this, but then that begins to kind of spread out the program, right? So once that happens, do you want somebody in a wheelchair to kind of go that far versus an elevator? So I think there's the whole subtleties of this discussion of inclusion that needs to be kind of broken down to the specific groups and specific issues that needs to cover. I don't think we can say there's a general inclusion umbrella for those things. But sometimes when we design buildings for just simple human needs, it begins to be inclusive, right? So the idea of daylight, the idea of creating these community spaces, the idea of creating relief spaces. So not every space is programmed for every second, right? So some of these items are there, and I think as we begin to delve into deeper discussions, deeper detail, some of these drivers for specific inclusion groups begin to kind of drive the project.
So did you want to add?
So, yes, so as part of our programming process, we met with about 180 people across a number of days. And two of the aspects of education that were addressed in just about every meeting that we talked about, that we conducted, was a discussion of universal design for learning and social emotional learning. And so we all know universal design. Universal design is handicapped accessibility, the fact that this space doesn't have a ramp to get down to the lower level. I'm talking about universal design for learning, and that really it starts to address the idea that individuals learn in different ways, and so how do educators and children communicate and connect at the level that the educator that the child needs? And so there's an awful lot of discussion around the ability for the child to access learning, and how does that relate to the space? What Saul was talking about is having those choices, the variety of types of spaces. Social emotional learning also and is a very big aspect of how educators and children are communicating today. And again, how do you create those spaces in between that allow those kinds of activities to go on? advisory and other discussions that need to take place with kids. So though the educators spend a lot of time talking about
Oh, one more thing. So I know you're shaking your head, but that,
Sorry.
for instance, take the whole special education classes, right? The old model was to create a group of special education classes. So people would see the kids going to the special education class and that kid needs special education, right? So there's a stigma to that, whatever reason that kid needs a special education for. So for now, just as a sort of what I would call macro strategy that we would do at this stage of the game, we distributed all the special education classes in the school. So they can be special education class, but they can be also a conference room, or it can be a sort of a supplementary education class. So the idea there is that groups are not categorized or sort of put in a special zone, a special area. That's just a macro strategy.
Can I just say two things? One, Phil, I'm gonna respectfully disagree with you that universal design does not mean that you can get down here. That's accessible. Universal design has 7 guiding principles, which now I see head nodding, so we're speaking the same language. It makes a building simple, intuitive, and easy to use for everyone, not just students in a wheelchair or someone that has, so that's one point. And then the other point is from a building standpoint, I would hope that that would be a guiding principle and that decisions that are made around how one student accesses a space versus another student can be, to the best that we can make it, the same. So trust me, I will push on these guys to include, and those are just principles, and they're like, you hope to get there, and there are not a lot of buildings that are fully there, but it's a hope that we can get our buildings closer and closer to being fully inclusive. So from where I sit, and I've told you this a bunch of times, I will be an advocate for that, and I will push on these guys. It is, it sounds like you want it to appear now and be visible, and it's hard not to look at it through the lens by which you do and not see it, but there are elements that will be in there, and we'll continue to try and show them to the community so that people feel heard.
Thank you. It's not that we want it to be visible, we want to know that it is the first thing that is being thought of as the space is being created. Because sustainability is an amazing goal, and I agree, an important goal. But our children can't access that space and can't get in there, and I don't just mean like can they actually physically get in there, but they can't be in there and use the space, then you know what, the sustainability goal, well, it's not as meaningful, right? We want our children. Well, but you want your children to also have good air to breathe, right? So you can't really, like, you really
I'm
shouldn't pit
not
this against
trying to
sustainability.
pit it against, I understand. I'm not trying to.
I
pit
assure
them
you, we
against
have the
each other.
kids first while we build a sustainable school. Can I give Justin a minute or two?
Please.
Okay.
Yeah, because I really think, when I drive away in a half an hour, hopefully these chairs are unforgiving, at least a half an hour. One of my takeaways, the more powerful moments, and I believe I'm going to echo what you were saying as well, is we need to listen to our students. And the letter that was shared from the perspective of a 14-year-old, in a music program was very powerful. We did something as a faculty and staff last year that was one of the most powerful, moments I've ever had in education. We actually brought it together here. We did a challenge success shadow day. And we had 16 educators shadow 16 students. And it was my goal to shadow a 6th grader, a 7th grader, and an 8th grader. And I had those students in mind. I was thankful that I did not reach out to those students because I received an email from a 6th grade boy on an IEP who's on the spectrum. And he sent me one line, and that was, Mr. Cameron, I would love for you to shadow me and get a perspective of what it's like to be a special education student at Concord Middle School. And I was like, that's it. I'm doing this differently. I'm going to shadow this 6th grade boy, I'm going to shadow a 7th grader from Boston, and I'm going to shadow an 8th grader from our GSA. And it was one of the most powerful things that we've done. And in my own experience, to walk with the boy And to walk into a cafeteria that is just so loud and so sensory input, he just walked away, and I'm like, oh gosh, the bathroom again. It's like he walked towards the bathroom, and then from that point, I'm ashamed to say it was early spring, we had to find him a different space for his lunchtime. And that's the types of things that we have to have in mind in building this new school. Is like, okay, we're gonna have grade level lunches, what's that cafeteria gonna look like? And how is that gonna serve those students, where the lights were so bright and the sounds were so loud? Even, the shutting the locker, I remember him just being taken back at the sound of that locker. So even the decisions that are made, I think they're called soft costs, of the type of furniture we have and how those lockers closing, those are all very important decisions in the culture and climate that we have. Right now I have students who walk to these lockers, and because they're not fixed to a ceiling, they know if you kick them to the bottom, they actually pop open. You don't have to use the locker. Great, right, for the kids.
Only the best for our sixth graders.
But we know, you might not, what's so unique and polarizing and ironic about sensory integration, it's either that kid is crashing into you or taking his or her finger as she's walking down the hall for that input, or it's the kid that loud noise because that kid is kicking the locker open just starts out the day like that. Our Boston students drive an hour to get here, and we took that bus ride with them when we shadowed these Boston students. And for them to arrive and to go to a room like this with 140 other 7th graders is just like, after a long ride like that. So these are the types of things, this is why we need to get students involved. And that's what Lori said earlier. So getting more students involved, in a sense of what they're experiencing now and how we can make that different when we go to the
I guess I agree with Dawn. I think some of the things you're craving to hear, it's just too early yet. And just try to have faith. We are on it, and we have the teachers on it, and Dawn is on it, and this team is going to be on it. So again, just like the sustainability and other things, it's just too early to show you what it's going to look like, and that gets, I think, a little nebulous. Linda.
I just wanted to ask a question about inclusivity and sensory overload. We talked a lot about sound. In a lot of the designs, you talked about the orientation of the school and the classrooms being south-facing and where it gets a lot of sunlight, but that's a lot of sun in your eyes. And I heard from a parent, I don't remember who it was telling me their daughter gets headaches at school because the sun is like right in their eyes the whole time. From an inclusivity standpoint, wouldn't it be better to be classrooms oriented where they have indirect light, not direct?
No, you need classrooms where you have choice over whether you want all that light or if you want to dim it or darken it or that sort of thing. I think that's what we've been talking about, is you want to be in control of that option. I'm even hearing things like you can dim lights and things like that, all sorts of options we don't have.
Right.
Go ahead.
Right now, we may not have those options, but I want to make a clear difference between the south-facing, the best orientation is east-west, so you have a lot of south-facing, but that doesn't mean that those classes are fully glazed. So it's the way our designers are going to design that fenestration to allow light to come in, but not glare. What you mentioned about the student having problems is probably an overglazed building that has a lot of glare coming in. And part of sustainability is about glare control and quality daylight, not just abundant daylight, but quality daylight. And then controls, there'll be shades because there are teaching moments where we need some darkness. The other difference is the lighting system. So you're not gonna get this, which is old fluorescent, and you don't see it, but it flickers, and that's really bad for eyes. So the new lighting designs and lighting technology, which is LED, doesn't have that flickering effect, even with the dimming. And this one of the system we're going to put in the school, which is actually required by code, is called Advanced Digital Network, and that's going to allow the teachers to really fine-tune different areas of the classroom. So there could be a dark corner for a student that needs to be more in the dark, inclusion students that need to be more in the darker corner. There are ways where they could do tasks that requires less light and organize a corner of the classroom that way, and then have a corner of the classroom that's more, bright. So there'll be all kinds of flexibility within the lighting system to support the different type of tasks.
I
I
think
feel
there
like
was
what I
also-
keep
sorry, I
hearing
think
is
there was a
flexibility on
Yeah,
everything.
But I think there was a misunderstanding. Our preferred orientation for a classroom would be northern exposure.
Well, I was just looking at the design. They were all like the bars are always, the classrooms were south facing.
We have both situations there, but what happens is that you prefer to have either a south or a north orientation because it's easy to create sunshades for the southern orientation. If the classes are right on east-west, the sun gets really low and it gets more difficult to do that. So the preferred orientation usually is north-south, north much preferred, but because the amount of area, you'd have to have south, and then it's easier to protect from the sun, so you can block it.
One other thing you need to remember, on the south, you have a lot of trees.
Yeah.
So you have a good canopy, so there's going to be natural shading.
I'm going to go to people who haven't spoken yet, if you're okay with that. Go ahead.
My name's Sylvia Green, and my son, who's now 42, came to this school, and my granddaughter, who is 10 months old, I hope will come to the new middle school. I'm so excited to have a team that is thinking about sustainability and universal design for learning. I teach adults who are learning disabled in Cambridge, and the one aspect of universal design that I think hasn't been mentioned is that a building that is designed for people who are challenged in some way is not only good for everybody, but it can be beautiful. And the element of beauty, I think, is really important for 11 to 14-year-olds who, I agree with our
Mr. Cameron,
principal, is a very hazardous time in human development. And I'm also a member of Mothers Out Front with Bouja, strongly hoping that this will be not only net zero ready and solar ready, but a net zero building eventually, and a building with a beautiful cover of solar panels. And the point I wanted to make, I think I've lost it here, but I know. I went to a Mothers Out Front conference at the Martin Luther King Middle School in Cambridge. What a beautiful building. And all the aspects that make it a sustainable building are also beautiful. So I think universal design and sustainability are in no way in conflict with each other. They're both extremely important. So I'm thrilled that the design team is thinking both.
Yeah, I love how you wove all that together. Thank you. Yeah.
Can I just say that the MLK school is my firm, so
Oh.
it keeps coming up. And I didn't design it; it's not like mine, but the firm that I work for designed that. So again, like, I'm a resource for these guys. If anything that the community likes out of that we can help them inform anything. So like, feel free to send it to the middle school email, and I can be a resource to them in that respect.
Just as a quick aside, Charlie Parker. The MLK is also a great model for energy efficiency. You mentioned sustainability. We looked at the numbers for MLK and they're extraordinary. So not only is it a beautiful building, but the numbers are overachiever numbers in terms of what they're able to do.
There's a white paper out there on it. I don't know if anyone's read it. I can share that. We can put it on the website. You have come on.
All right, I am just gonna watch the clock a little bit and give people who haven't spoken time, and then anyone who wants to stay, by all means, come find us or the design team. Yeah.
Let's have a quick question.
Sure.
Mike Son, I'm here in elementary school.
Yeah.
I just, I know that there's a lot of planning and including the sustainability and the inclusivity and time frame wise, are we looking at, I know that this is very broad schematic design. What are we, I missed the first few minutes.
Oh,
Maybe
sure.
we have
So
covered
our
that.
goal would be to have a schematic design by the summertime. And then pending a town meeting vote, it would go into full design. And that would take about a year. We break ground fall of '21 with a new school open the fall of '23. Thank you. But anybody else who came in late, that's great to review that. Yeah, Dave.
I'm David Allen. At 78, I'm one of those who don't have children in school. Perhaps it's useful to hear at least one point of view from that generation. The question surely is priorities when you look at it from this stage of life. We're building for at least 50 years, maybe 60 years. The big bump that will cost will get paid by those who are around for the next decade or two, depending upon the way the debt's structured. But sure as hell, this itself will be long, long after I'm gone, far beyond my lifespan and the rest of us in this generation. So what are the priorities? It's a bit philosophical to say, but in a society, pretty clearly health and education are the top priorities. And we look at our national political scene, at least once again, a personal point of view, our very severe problems trace back to, let's be blunt about it, a failure of education. It's hard to say anything is more important than education. Concord can't change what's going on in the country, but Concord can do its part, right? This, as you see, argues that we need to do the best we can. It's not just buildings, it's all the rest of it, but buildings are so important. Now, that gets us, of course, to the ask, as has been discussed earlier. And Concord, like so many other places, has a very serious problem. There are those in Concord for whom the ask just doesn't have a financial impact. Like, look big, but it just doesn't have a financial impact. There are others who may be driven out of town when the taxes go up. The impact is disastrous. This is a discussion that the town is beginning to have. It really focuses on the FinCom. It's something I care about, others care about. There's now interesting new insights about how we might deal with that problem, how the burden might be shared by those who can afford it and not impact those who aren't. Not a discussion for tonight, but that's different from this question of priorities. Solving that problem is a problem we need to solve, but it doesn't reflect on the priority from this person.
Thanks, Dave. Peter.
Hi, Peter Chalis, former school committee member and finance committee member now. Just one of the things I wanted to say was, looking back at some of the lessons, one of the things I wish we had done at the high school was make the second gym bigger, to have that more space. And so, given that we're not going to likely follow the MSBA guideline, it seems like this is a great opportunity to take advantage of that. And if I look at a cost trade-off for what you get for the money, that is one area where I think it would be well spent to serve the not only the school but the community.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on what Peter was saying, Dean Banfield, I'm the chair of the finance committee, so there you go. Getting back to the community uses, and the two that were identified were the auditorium and the gym. And Peter's point about the gym, I think, is very well taken. The community does not have an adequate amount of gymnasium space to really satisfy the needs of the programs, and it would be very helpful to have a good-sized gym. However, if you look at the auditorium problem, so to speak, which is town meeting doesn't do well in the high school, it's a challenge, etc. Making a larger auditorium to suit the community for town meeting challenges the parking problem. Just going to an event here at Peabody as a parent means you're parking out on the street. It's ridiculous. So to have to build enough parking fields to satisfy community use of that magnitude is, and it's in an isolated place, it starts to make very little sense. Or you're gonna have to have shuttle buses going up and down Marlborough Road or something. I don't know what you would do. So we really have to think long and hard about whether we can really utilize this point in town, so far from any other places to put cars, as a place to put a community.
So just a little more
center.
feedback on the conversations we're having. They're building designs that the auditorium may or may not be there. We're not sure. It's gonna be a discussion among the community because there is a significant cost. And so I think you're all right, and we're not gonna just make that decision by ourselves. So there's a lot more to come, and we're gonna try to frame these so that there's decisions. I didn't say no, I just said we're gonna have to talk about it more.
I'm coming to every meeting.
All of you should keep coming. We want that input. So it is gonna be some hard conversations coming, and this is why we wanna hear all of this now, but there's gonna be more and more of these, and you can hear as the money gets real, it's gonna get harder and harder. So I don't have all the answers to that. I know I'm not making all these decisions by myself because there's no way we're gonna make everybody happy, right? So we're gonna do our best and listen and take it all in, and the 17-member building committee is gonna make the final calls, so. Anybody want final word? Oh, Pat, good, thanks.
I just want to say that I'm Pat Nelson, I'm on the building committee, and as I've been listening to the educational goals for this program, all the discussion that we've had about sustainability and inclusion on the committee, I keep going back to how different this feels than than other building projects that I've been on in town, in that we're really talking about designing an educational program for the whole child. And when we start from that premise, then music, art, sports, all of those things raise up to a different level. So I think when we're making our decisions about how we create a building, or what kind of building we want to create and what our priorities are, we're always going to need to focus on the whole child, and then we'll have a good outcome.
Yeah, great. Well said, thank you. Anyone who wants to grab any of us before you go? Oh, sorry, Heather. She is chair of the school committee, so I'm gonna let her go.
The only reason she lets me talk. No, I just wanted to first thank you all so much for coming in. This is so great to have input. I'm also on the building committee. I'll consider this either shameless plug or invitation. But Pat Nelson and I are in charge of communications for the building committee. So one point is, if you do not feel like you're getting enough information and have ideas of where you would like to get information and see information about this building project, please reach out to me and let us know. We are all ears for ideas. And even more importantly, if you care about this and would like to get involved, we are looking for volunteers. So we're looking to have more of a team on the ground to help with communications. The two of us have lots of grand ideas, and there is no possible way that we can execute all of the communications that we need to do to get the message out to this community. So if you're interested in this project and want to help be involved at all, we could give you a small job or a large one. Please be in touch. You can email me, I'm hbout.sc,
or just email the building committee.
Or the building
email
committee.
And we'll get it.
Building committee is MSBC, as in middle school building committee. MSBC@concordps.org. So send an email anytime, and we're happy to put you to work.
And I'll shamelessly say that at my age, trying to be on the communications committee, we seriously need some help with social media and pull out some ideas. I'm quite serious.
She's outing me that I'm not very good at this social media.
I didn't say that, but
where's the whole child when we need them?
Yeah, we need a whole child. So But that is one of the things that we're trying to hit the population that's going to be looking at their computers
Thank you
and
all.
screens.
Thank
A lot of
you.
people want